American farmland, race, and generational wealth. A timeline before European colonization. Indigenous nations possess and manage the land. The territory that would become the United States was already inhabited, cultivated, hunted, and managed by indigenous nations. European colonial governments gradually claimed this territory through warfare, forced removal, coerced treaties, and settlement. The land, later described as public land, was therefore not originally empty or unclaimed. Much of it became available for white settlement only after indigenous people had been displaced. 1600s, 1700s, colonial governments distribute land to European settlers. English colonies used systems such as land grants and head rights to encourage European settlement. Colonists could receive land for transporting themselves or other laborers to the colonies. As racial slavery developed, white settlers gained ownership of land, while enslaved Africans were legally treated as property. Black labor cleared forests, constructed plantations, and cultivated the crops that increased the value of white-owned land. Land ownership, political rights, and racial status became closely connected. 1776, 1783, the United States gains control of Western territory. After the American Revolution, the new United States claimed enormous territories west of the original colonies. The federal government began surveying, selling, and distributing this land. Revenue from Western land sales helped support the new national government. Indigenous nations continued to occupy much of the territory being claimed. 1785, the Land Ordinance establishes the federal land distribution system. The Land Ordinance of 1785 created a standardized method for surveying and selling Western land. Territory was divided into townships and sections that could be sold to settlers and land speculators. This system became one of the foundations of American expansion and private land ownership. Access depended heavily on money, political connections, and the ability to relocate, advantages that overwhelmingly favored free white Americans. 1790, citizenship is formally restricted by race. The Naturalization Act of 1790 limited naturalized citizenship to free white persons. Because citizenship was frequently connected to voting, legal protection, and land ownership, this restriction helped establish the United States as a nation in which access to property was structured around whiteness. DOS 1803, the Louisiana Purchase expands federal land claims. The United States purchased France's territorial claim to approximately 828,000 square miles of North America. Indigenous nations already lived throughout this territory, but the federal government treated the land as available for American expansion, settlement, and sale. The Louisiana Purchase dramatically increased the amount of territory the government could eventually transfer to settlers, speculators, railroad companies, and state governments. 1830. The Indian Removal Act opened southeastern land to white settlement. Congress passed the Indian Removal Act under President Andrew Jackson. The federal government forced numerous indigenous nations from the southeast to territory west of the Mississippi River. Their former lands, including valuable cotton-growing territory, were open to white settlement and plantation agriculture. This removal helped produce the expansion of the Cotton Kingdom and the domestic slave trade. 1830s, 1860, plantation land and enslaved labor generate white wealth. Cotton production expanded across Mississippi, Louisiana, Alabama, Arkansas, and Texas. White plantation owners accumulated land, enslaved people, crops, and credit. Enslaved Black Americans created much of the economic value but were legally prohibited from owning the land they worked. Plantation land could be inherited by white descendants, along with houses, equipment, livestock, and financial connections. Black families generally inherited neither the land nor compensation for the labor used to develop it. 1841. The Preemption Act favors settlers already occupying Western land. The Preemption Act allowed certain settlers occupying federal land to purchase up to 160 acres before the land was offered publicly. Although it did not explicitly exclude every non-white person, eligibility rules involving citizenship and settlement strongly favored white Americans. The act helped convert occupation of Western territory into legally recognized private ownership. 1848, 1850, Western expansion creates new opportunities for white land ownership. Following the Mexican-American War, the United States acquired territory that would include California, Nevada, Utah, Arizona, New Mexico, and portions of other states. Congress then passed the Donation Land Claim Act of 1850, which offered land in Oregon Territory to white settlers and people classified as half-breed Indians. The law explicitly used race to determine who could receive land. 1862. The Homestead Act creates a massive federal land transfer program. President Abraham Lincoln signed the Homestead Act. Eligible applicants could claim 160 acres of surveyed federal land by paying a filing fee, living on the property, and improving it. Over the life of the program, the federal government distributed approximately 270 million acres. Because slavery still existed in 1862, most Black Americans could not immediately participate. White Americans entered the program with greater freedom of movement, financial resources, legal recognition, and government protection. Much of the distributed territory had previously belonged to indigenous nations. January 1865, 40 acres becomes a limited federal policy. Union General William T. Sherman issued Special Field Orders Number 15. The order reserved confiscated and abandoned coastal land in parts of South Carolina, Georgia, and Florida for settlement by formerly enslaved families. Parcels of up to 40 acres could be assigned to each family. Thousands of Black people began settling and farming this land. This was not yet a nationwide promise, but it represented a real attempt to connect emancipation with land ownership. March 1865. The Freedmen's Bureau has established Congress, created the Bureau of Refugees, Freedmen, and Abandoned Lands. The Freedmen's Bureau provided food, medical assistance, education, labor contract supervision, and limited land assistance to formerly enslaved people. The Bureau also managed some confiscated and abandoned Confederate property. Black families hoped this land would become the economic foundation of freedom. Late 1865. President Andrew Johnson reverses Black land redistribution. After Lincoln's assassination, President Andrew Johnson offered pardons to many former Confederates and restored much of their confiscated property. Most of the coastal land occupied under Sherman's order was returned to its previous white owners. Black families who had already settled and cultivated the land were removed or forced to negotiate labor contracts with the restored landowners. The federal government effectively prioritized the property claims of former slaveholders over the land claims of formerly enslaved workers. 1865-1870s, sharecropping replaces slavery across much of the South. Without land, livestock, or money, many freed people entered sharecropping and tenant farming arrangements. Landowners supplied land and sometimes equipment. Black farmers supplied labor and received a portion of the crop. Merchants and landowners frequently controlled the accounting, credit, and sale of crops. High interest rates and manipulated debts prevented many families from accumulating enough money to purchase land. Black Americans were legally free, but often remained economically dependent upon white landowners. 1866. The Southern Homestead Act opens public land in the South Congress, reserved public land in Alabama, Arkansas, Florida, Louisiana, and Mississippi for settlement by freed people and loyal white Southerners. In theory, the act gave black families an opportunity to acquire land. In practice, many freed people lacked transportation, equipment, capital, and protection. Much of the available land was remote, forested, swampy, or agriculturally difficult. White applicants and land speculators were generally better positioned to navigate the system. 1876, the Southern Homestead Act is repealed. Congress repealed the Southern Homestead Act after approximately 10 years. Some black families successfully obtained land, but the program never produced land ownership on the scale formerly enslaved people needed. The end of Reconstruction also allowed white-controlled Southern governments to weaken black political power and property protections. 1877, Reconstruction ends. Federal troops withdrew from the South as part of the political settlement surrounding the presidential election of 1876. White supremacist governments regained control across the region. Black landowners faced discriminatory laws, political exclusion, violence, and unequal treatment in local courts. Ownership on paper did not guarantee protection in practice. 1880s, 1900s, Black Americans acquire farmland despite discrimination. Black families purchased land through savings, mutual assistance, religious organizations, and community networks. Many began with small or marginal properties that white landowners were willing to sell. Nevertheless, black land ownership expanded significantly. Land became a source of food, housing, independence, political power, and protection from exploitative white employers. 1887, the Dawes Act breaks apart indigenous communal land. The Dawes Act divided tribally held reservation land into individual allotments. Land remaining after allotment was declared surplus and open to non-indigenous settlement. The policy caused indigenous nations to lose tens of millions of acres. This land also entered the expanding American system of private ownership and white settlement. 1890s, 1930s, racial violence threatens black landowners, black farmers, and business owners were targeted through lynching, intimidation, arson, and forced displacement. In some communities, successful black land ownership challenged the racial hierarchy. Violence could drive families from their property, leaving land vulnerable to seizure, fraudulent sale, or acquisition by white neighbors. Local courts and law enforcement institutions frequently failed to protect black owners. 1910, black farmland reaches its historical high point. By approximately 1910, black Americans owned or operated between 14 million and 16 million acres of land, primarily in the South. This achievement occurred only a few generations after emancipation and despite widespread discrimination. Black-owned farms supported families, schools, churches, and independent communities. The land also represented a growing base of intergenerational wealth. 1920, black farmers operate approximately 14% of American farms. Black-operated farms reach roughly 14% of all farms in the United States. This did not mean that black and white farmers possessed equal acreage, land quality, credit, or market access. Black farms were generally smaller and less valuable. Nevertheless, black farmers had established a significant agricultural presence. 1920s, 1930s, black land ownership begins a prolonged decline. Several forces accelerated black land loss: racial violence and intimidation, fraudulent deeds and property transfers, unfair property tax assessments, tax foreclosures, lack of access to attorneys and probate services, agricultural debt, forced partition sales, migration away from the rural South, exclusion from affordable credit, Land frequently passed informally to children without a legally recorded will. This created heirs property, in which numerous descendants shared ownership without a clear individual title. 1930s, New Deal farm programs reinforced local racial power. During the Great Depression, federal agricultural programs offered loans, payments, crop controls, and other assistance. Many programs were administered through local committees dominated by white landowners. These committees influenced who received loans, subsidies, acreage allotments, and technical assistance. Payments intended to reduce crop production frequently went to landowners rather than black tenant farmers. Some landowners removed tenants from the land while keeping federal payments. Programs presented as race neutral could therefore produce racially unequal results through local administration. 1940s, 1960s, mechanization and discriminatory credit accelerate displacement. Mechanized cotton harvesting reduced the demand for agricultural labor. Black farmers attempting to modernize often struggled to obtain affordable loans for tractors, equipment, seed, and land improvements. White farmers were generally more likely to receive timely credit and government assistance. A delayed farm loan could be as destructive as a denied loan. If funding arrived after planting season, the farmer could lose an entire year's income and fall into foreclosure. 1950, black-operated farms fall to approximately 10% of American farms. The number of black farmers continued to decline as families lost land or left the South. White farmers also left agriculture during this period, but black farmers disappeared at a much faster rate because they possessed fewer financial reserves and faced discriminatory institutions. Land from failed farms was often purchased or absorbed by larger, better financed operations. 1960s, 1980s, USDA discrimination contributes to black farm loss. Black farmers reported that local USDA offices denied applications, delayed loans, withheld information, or offered less favorable assistance than that provided to white farmers. County committees responsible for administering federal programs remained overwhelmingly white in many areas. Farmers who could not obtain operating loans were unable to purchase seed, fertilizer, machinery, or livestock. Missed planting seasons and foreclosures transferred additional land out of black ownership. So 1969, black-operated farms fall to approximately 3%. By 1969, black-operated farms represented only about 3% of American farms. This represented a dramatic decline from approximately 14% in 1920. The decline was not simply the result of people voluntarily choosing different careers. It also reflected unequal access to government assistance, credit, legal protection, and expanding agricultural technology. 1970s, 1980s, heirs property becomes a major pathway for land loss. When a landowner died without a formal will, the property could become collectively owned by many descendants. Any partial heir could sometimes sell an interest to an outside buyer. That buyer could then petition a court to order the entire property sold, frequently at a price below its true market value. Black families lost substantial acreage through these partition sales. Heirs property owners also had difficulty using land as collateral or qualifying for federal agricultural programs. 1982, the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights documents USDA discrimination. The U.S. Commission on Civil Rights reported serious problems involving minority farmers' access to USDA programs. Despite government investigations and repeated complaints, discriminatory practices continued. Civil rights complaints were often delayed, ignored, or mishandled. For struggling farmers, years of administrative delay could mean losing the farm before the complaint was ever resolved. Say 1992, Black-operated farms fall to approximately 1%. By 1992, Black-operated farms accounted for approximately 1% of American farms, down from about 14% in 1920. A major source of Black economic independence had been reduced to a fraction of its former size. Meanwhile, farmland retained by white families continued generating income, collateral, appreciation, and inheritance. 1997, Black farmers filed the Pigford v. Glickman lawsuit. Black farmers filed a class action lawsuit against the United States Department of Agriculture. The plaintiffs argued that the USDA had discriminated against Black farmers in farm loans and benefit programs, and had failed to investigate their civil rights complaints properly. The case brought national attention to the federal government's role in Black land loss. 1999. The Pigford settlement is approved. A federal court approved a settlement process for Black farmers who had experienced USDA discrimination. Thousands of claims were eventually approved. By 2008, more than 15,000 claims had received approximately $972 million in payments and benefits. The settlement provided compensation, but it could not restore every lost farm or reproduce the generations of wealth that the land might have created. 2010, Congress provides additional funding for unresolved claims. Congress authorized additional money for Black farmers who had missed the original Pigford filing deadline. The legislation acknowledged that many potentially eligible farmers had been excluded from the original process. Compensation continued, but controversy remained over documentation requirements, rejected claims, and whether payments reflected the true value of lost land and opportunity. Say 2018, Congress creates new protections for heirs of property farmers. The 2018 Farm Bill authorized measures allowing some heirs property operators to establish farm records and gain greater access to USDA programs. It also created the Heirs Property Relending Program to help families resolve ownership and succession problems. These policies addressed one of the legal structures that had contributed to Black land loss. SA 2021. USDA launches the Heirs Property Relending Program. The USDA announced funding to help families clear titles, resolve multiple ownership claims, and establish legal succession. The department acknowledged that heirs as property had prevented many Black farmers and other historically disadvantaged landowners from obtaining loans and federal assistance. Present day, farmland remains a major source of inherited wealth. American farmland provides more than agricultural income. It can generate rent, development rights, timber revenue, mineral rights, government payments, and long-term appreciation. Families who received land or had their ownership consistently protected could pass these benefits from one generation to the next. Families denied land after emancipation lost the original asset and every generation of value it could have produced. Black families who later acquired land frequently faced additional systems that made keeping and transferring that property more difficult. The present distribution of American farmland is therefore not simply the result of which families worked hardest. It reflects centuries of government land grants, indigenous dispossession, slavery, reversed Reconstruction policies, discriminatory credit systems, and unequal property protection. Generational farming is consequently also a history of generational public policy, who received land, whose ownership was defended, whose labor created its value, and whose descendants were permitted to inherit the result.